their respective parties. Well, forget about that. That's old news. Now the goal is to appeal to one multi-billionaire so that individual can contribute hundreds of millions of dollars into your campaign.
Citizens united, more like citizens divided. Namesake meant to fool you is intentionally misguided. To call this freedom of speech is exceptionally nearsighted. SCOTUS back the 1%, all of whom we're delighted. We get freedom of speech, but in proportion to our dollar. Voice trained out by the elite as our own voice gets smaller. Their dogma broadcast complete, all you can do is holler. Threatens our democracy as our freedom gets squandered. Speech by politicians and fabricates suspicions. Disguises toxic visions used to block more court decisions. Oversimplifies the complex and preys on our emotions. Skips balances and checks to enforce preconceived notions. It's just how they do business, and we all watch them do it. They tell us that it's legal and there is nothing more to it. Half the voting population have all just said, well, screw it. The other half would overthrow if they only knew it.
One person, one vote, that we're all equal, that you have as much say about what happens in government as anybody else? Or do we want to have a political system where a handful of billionaires will determine who gets elected president, who gets elected senator, who gets elected governor, and have members of Congress go crawling up to these billionaires? What do you need, Mr. Billionaire? How do I get the hundreds of millions of dollars you can give me? Is that really what American democracy is supposed to be about?
It's a campaign contribution. It's not freedom of speech, like in the Constitution, but puts bribery in their reach. We need more prosecution to end this overreach. They're buying politicians to keep them on a leash. It's what's lining their pockets. Why would they reform? Dirty campaign finance makes these puppets perform. If money changes hands and services are rendered, they owned you from the moment dirty cash money was tendered. Loyalty to your own team is showing your consent. What will be left of this game when our trust has all been spent? Billions to buy laws despite public discontent to eliminate your vote or make it irrelevant. This is not a donation, they are buying a product. Bribery skirts the laws and masquerades as good conduct. Corruption so ingrained that it's baked into the construct. It's time we show our leaders that they can't all go and get one.
When you talk about an inalienable right that restricted voting and registration in 5 different ways, all of which disproportionately affected African Americans. They went on to say, this is the Fourth Circuit. I didn't say this. The federal court said it with almost surgical precision. We are better than that.
The 3 wealthiest people in this country own more wealth than the bottom half of America, 160 million people. The top 1/10 of 1% own almost as much wealth as...
All right, welcome. Here we go. Good to be here. Good to be here on a Saturday night. Looking at the news a little bit, see how things are going, and it looks like everything is set with the audio and everything. I think we're doing good. So, welcome. I've got some stuff for us tonight to go over, discuss a few different stories that we're going to talk about. I do plan on keeping this going Saturday night, 6 p.m. Pacific on YouTube. I have also been streaming on Twitch. So if you're a Twitch user, please head on over, check me out. I could definitely use some follows, and it'd be great to have you guys in the chat, right? I've been getting a number of Trumpers over there getting in there, and it's definitely not as much fun. So it'd be great for those of you who use Twitch to get you showing up in some of those streams. But like I said, I am going to keep this Saturday night stream going on YouTube because this is a fun one too. So we'll get into that. And we'll take a look at things. So I've got a few stories for tonight. It was a little dark this week. Right? So I've tried to mix things in. We'll try to keep it a little bit light. No one wants to get too bummed out on a Saturday night. So we'll try to keep it a little lighthearted. There's a couple things that are, just meant to kind of lighten the mood. We do have some serious things to talk about, but I'll try not to go too deep in it. I'll try not to get myself ramped up too much, right? Because I know sometimes when I'm reading these stories, I can start to get a little intense. So let's take a look at what we've got going on here with some stories tonight. So first one, Trump campaign disguised, and let me move that around a little bit. Each story is each of these is a little bit centered, a little different, so I got to make little adjustments. So Trump campaign disguised and laundered nearly $170 million worth of spending, watchdog group alleges in a new federal complaint. So basically what's going on, he claims he's the most transparent president we've ever had. He's made that claim a number of times. It's just not the case. So what happens is it's basically money laundering. So that's why they say the Trump campaign disguised and laundered nearly $170 million worth of spending, is because they're using the same type of tactics that someone would do if they were laundering money, right? So it makes it very hard to trace that money back, right? So that's what they're doing. They're sending it through organizations that make it difficult to then see where that money is getting spent. And you're not supposed to do this with campaign spending, right? It's actually against the rules. But remember, the FEC is essentially neutered at this point. The Federal Election Commission, it doesn't have quorum at this point. It hasn't for months and months and months. So it's insane to think that we're going into a major presidential election, right, in the next few months, and we don't have the Federal Election Commission actually functioning the way that they're supposed to, right? I mean, no matter what you say, there's no way to describe that except for corrupt. So they can't really go after this. The people that are on the board or members of that committee are mentioning this, but they can't really do much because they don't have quorum as a committee, meaning they've essentially been put in the corner and they can't step up and do things. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, there we go. Looks good. So not good. Right? Definitely not a good situation. We'll see where this goes, right? But we know how this tends to play out with Trump, right? Just do the bad thing and then just drag it out as long as you can. And then if something comes of it, then you just kind of tie it up in the courts as long as you can. This is nothing new. And it makes sense because there have been all these allegations since the 80s that essentially Trump has been a money launderer, right? That a lot of his real estate deals are actually money laundering for the Russians and for other countries around the world, but largely the Russians. That's the accusation. So it kind of makes sense that this is what he knows, right? This is his business. This is what he knows how to do. So this is what he's having his people do. So, welcome everybody. Looks like we got a few people watching. Feel free to make comments in the chat there, right? Feel free to speak up and say anything if you want. All right, what do we got next here? Which one was this? Oh, this is one. You definitely want to look out for this. So Mitt Romney wants to use the crisis to cut your Social Security. So we had the early bailouts in relation to the coronavirus. Well, now there's been this discussion this week about what should the next one be, right? What do we need now as a country? And it looks like they didn't get the deadline was yesterday in order to miss that first unemployment cutoff. So basically for that week, people will not get that extra money, which will, as we'll see in some stories coming up, that's going to hurt some people because we already have some people in some pretty bad shape right now, right? People are hurting. But there's a lot of back and forth about this new bailout that they're discussing, and what they're trying to do is slip stuff in there. So one of the things, right, Trump said this a lot this week, the Republicans are saying it as well, basically coming at the Democrats and saying, why are you making this so hard? We're trying to help people. Why are you arguing and holding this up? Well, this is a good example of why, right? They're trying to slip stuff into that bill, which isn't good. Essentially, what this would do is this would open the door to make it easy to start making Social Security cuts, which is obviously for a lot of people, that could be a very bad thing. So there's stuff like that inside the bill. And it's totally disingenuous, right? The Democrats have been trying to talk about this next round of stimulus for weeks, right? The Republicans waited until this week to start discussing it and then saying, what's up, Democrats? Why don't you just agree to whatever we're saying? People are hurting. We want to get this through. And the Democrats are saying, yeah, but we got to do the bill right. You could have been talking about this weeks ago, right? We could have been discussing this all along and negotiating things, and they're trying to slip stuff like this in here. So the good news is it does actually look like the position on the liability discussion may be weakening. Trump has given indication, and you never know when he says things, but there may be an indication that Trump is not necessarily pushing hard for that liability. That's kind of McConnell's thing. We'll see how it goes, though. But this is the kind of stuff that doesn't make the news as much. I mean, it's being reported on, but you're definitely not hearing it as much when you listen to the updates. We got to look out for this kind of stuff, right? We got to look out here and make sure that when we pass a bill, it's not just crumbs being given to the people. It should be crumbs being given to the companies, right? As we've seen, there's numerous fraud and stuff that's going on with the billions of dollars that are flowing to companies. The turkey dinner should be going to the working people of this country, and the crumbs should be going to the companies, and not so much of this where they're putting in these deals that are later on going to hurt Social Security. So we definitely don't want to see that. So keep your eye on that. Right. Okay. So there was a video we saw where the good news is in Portland, the federal agents have been pulled out of Portland, right? It looks like. That's what's been reported, is that they're not there anymore. And what did we see? The first, what have we had, 2 nights? But the reports were that as soon as those federal agents left, the protests went back to being peaceful, which gives credence to this narrative that it's not necessarily the protesters that are escalating things into quote-unquote riots and dangerous vandalism and dangerous stuff going on. It's really when the feds come in and start escalating things where things get bad. Now, yes, there are incidences here and there, but overall, it's not really fair to blame that on the protests because by and large, the protests have been fairly peaceful. It's people exercising their constitutional rights. So that was great. They pulled out of Portland. Unfortunately, what we've seen is they apparently have shown up in New York with a pretty disturbing video, which we'll look at in a minute. We'll go through why there's a couple things wrong. But this was the response that we saw. So this is the New York Police Department news. This is their Twitter account. In regard to the video, which we're about to watch, on social media that took place at 2nd Avenue and 25th Street, a woman taken into custody in an unmarked van was wanted for damaging police cameras during 5 separate criminal incidents in and around City Hall Park. The arresting officers were assaulted with rocks and bottles. So when we watch the video here, I would like you to count the number of rocks and bottles that were thrown. So when you watch the video, every time, just make it a little counter. Every time you see a rock or bottle thrown, count it, and we'll see. Because so far, the number of times I've watched it, I've been able to count 0, right? So 0 rocks and bottles getting thrown. And also, this was supposed to be justification for what they did, and I consider this in no way a justification. Did this woman damage 5 cameras around town? Maybe. Does that mean that you get to show up, not announce who you are, right, what agency you're with, physically grab this person against their will, throw them in an unmarked van and drive away? I don't see the fact that even if she is guilty of damaging cameras, to me, that's not how our law enforcement agencies in this country are supposed to be operating. So let's take a look. Remember, count those rocks and bottles. See local PD helping. So I didn't see a single rock or bottle getting thrown there, right? I didn't see it. Now, what we saw, right, this was extra disturbing because what we did see was police helping. We did not see that in Portland. When this kind of stuff was going on, what we did not see was the Portland Police Department stepping in and aiding in the process. I actually think they were probably all notified. You need to keep your distance because what we don't want is those two agencies clashing or causing some kind of an issue, or like in this case, that one is seen to be helping the other. So I think it was probably smart how the Portland PD seemed to handle it. Here is a different story. We actually have the New York Police Department stepping in and aiding in this nabbing of someone off the street for what I mean, we're talking about cameras being damaged here. And yes, that's a crime. I don't know why a more traditional arrest type situation could not have been performed, you know, one that was in line with our constitutional rights. So, you know, we got to keep an eye on that, keep an eye on this kind of stuff. The good news, again, we have not been seeing a ton of this happening. So it looks like maybe this experiment that was being run by the federal government of doing this kind of stuff, maybe they've kind of said, oh, we need to slow this a bit. We'll see. Time will tell. Time will tell. Right, where are we? Okay, here's one that well, it sort of speaks for itself. So this is Tucker Carlson talking about Obama, who was speaking at John Lewis's funeral, right? And the speech went viral, right? Lots of people like this speech, and we're talking about how great it was, and it was inspirational, and it was a great memorial, all that kind of stuff. Tucker Carlson has his own take on it. Let's hear what he has to say about it.
Imagine if some greasy politician showed up at your loved one's funeral and started throwing around stupid partisan...
Hey Google, play my whales mating playlist.
...talking points about Senate procedure.
Let's start that again.
Said Obama gave a divisive and deeply dishonest campaign speech in church. Here's part of what he said.
By ending some of the partisan gerrymandering so that all voters have the power to choose their politicians, not the other way around. And if all this takes eliminating the filibuster, another Jim Crow relic, in order to secure the God-given rights of every American, then that's what we should do.
It's hard to believe that clip is real, but it is, down to the cloying fake accent, Mr. Hawaii guy. But take 3 steps back. Imagine if some greasy politician showed up at your loved one's funeral and started throwing around stupid partisan talking points about Senate procedure. Can you imagine that? You would be shocked if that happened. You'd probably...
So there's a difference here. He's saying, well, what if it was your funeral? Well, I'm not John Lewis, right? I'm not basically a hero of this country fighting for civil rights for decades and decades, right? That was one of the major things he did. So the idea that Tucker Carlson is making of, well, what if it was you and someone turned your memorial political? It's different because most of us aren't political heroes, basically. So Obama was paying homage to the great work that John Lewis has done over the years and saying, let's continue that. He was saying, let's memorialize this man in real change, right? Let's make a difference. Let's make things better. And he was listing the ways to do it. I think that's what John Lewis would have liked. And he got a ton of positive feedback for this, right? People liked what was going on, what Obama was saying. People were very positive on it. I think Tucker Carlson just needs something to talk about, and he's got this weird take. And I don't even believe that Tucker Carlson believes what he's saying. I don't even think he actually believes this, because how could you? I mean, it's too ignorant of a point, right? Tucker Carlson is smarter than he's pretending to be in this clip here, right? He didn't show up and just... It's not like he showed up at my funeral and then all of a sudden made it super political. He's showing up at someone who is, by their nature, dedicated their lives to making a change for politics and making things a better place. So it's a pretty disingenuous argument, which, you know, Tucker Carlson is he's not exactly new to making disingenuous arguments. So there you go, Tucker. Whatever it is you do, whatever you call this, you keep doing it. But the rest of us are going to call it out and call it ridiculous. Oh, this one is kind of amusing, right? Before you fire tear gas, you might want to check what direction the wind is blowing so you can see where the cops are, right? So it's blowing back on themselves. They basically fired tear gas, but weren't paying attention to the wind. It's blowing back on themselves. Now, they're wearing masks, so it's not like they really tear gassed themselves, but certainly ineffective, and, you know, it looks a little silly. It looks a little ridiculous. Not really going to intimidate people with these kinds of tactics here. So I hope they learned a lesson. Next time they do that, maybe they'll be a little bit better at it. Okay, Trump threatens to ban TikTok from operating in the U.S. This is an interesting story, and it's a developing story. So we'll see how this goes. There may be good reason for banning TikTok, right? It's a little unclear at this point. But India banned TikTok. So TikTok coming out of China is basically seen as being possibly being used to spy on people, right? So you put this app on the phone, the app now has control of certain things, maybe it's spying on us. That may well be the case. So I know I bash Trump a lot, but this may be a situation where it might actually need to be banned, right? What's also interesting in this story is that Microsoft is trying to buy TikTok, which would change things a little bit. So one thing is that if Microsoft is in talks to buy TikTok, and Trump bans it in the U.S., and it was recently just banned in India, that's going to lower the price for TikTok. Microsoft's going to be able to pick it up at a much cheaper price. So one thing I worry about a little bit is that we know that Trump treats everything as very transactional. If I do something and you benefit from it, then there's going to be a time when I come ask you for payback. I come ask you to do a favor for me. We see that on a regular basis. So it worries me a little bit that he might have that relationship with Microsoft where he feels they owe him one and he has to do something about it. Plus the fact that if Microsoft picks it up cheap and then Microsoft owns it, that ban may be lifted on TikTok, and then now all of a sudden it's worth a lot more. And you know, that would be a pretty sweet deal for Microsoft if they end up pulling that off. But we'll see what happens. And it's not clear that that Trump can even implement a permanent ban on TikTok. He can't do that in the short term, but it is definitely not clear that he can do it, you know, like forever and just say TikTok doesn't exist. But he can definitely exert power, drive down the price of TikTok. Microsoft picks it up at fire sale prices. Trump lifts the ban. Then Microsoft got this incredible and very popular app, and they got it at very cheap prices. We'll see. This could go good. This could go bad. You know, who knows what's going to happen here, but it's an interesting story to talk about. Okay, let's talk about this one, right? This story is nice because it's not depressing, right? There's a few things we'll be talking about tonight that are fairly depressing. This is not one of them. Let me modify that. Let me move that around a little bit. So the Pentagon's UFO unit will make some findings public. So UFOs have been in the news this week because apparently there's information coming out about it, and there's even a Pentagon task force looking into it. So there's a little bit of legitimacy here, right? This is not just you know, people making up conspiracy theories. There is something to this. We don't know what this is, right? I'm not making the claim that aliens are here visiting us, but something is going on in this situation. Let's hear what they have to say about it.
Time to stop calling people who believe in UFOs crackpots after the recent revelation that there's actually a Pentagon task force looking into them. One astrophysicist who has worked for the Pentagon's UFO program since 2007 told the New York Times that he gave a classified briefing to a Defense Department agency about retrievals from, quote, off-world vehicles not made on this Earth. Are we on the brink of full disclosure about visitors from outer space? Joining me now is Christopher Mellon. He served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence during the Bill Clinton and George W. Bush administrations. He also co-hosts Unidentified, Inside America's UFO Investigation on the History Channel. So, Chris, I sense that there has been a sea change recently in the way in which these reports are being carried and covered. What accounts for it? What has gone on recently?
Yeah, thank you very much. You're absolutely right. And a good example of the sea change is the fact that none other than Scientific American itself has published an article saying the subject ought to be taken seriously and investigated by the scientific community. I think this change is largely primarily a result of the fact that the Defense Department and the Navy themselves have stood up and publicly acknowledged that this phenomenon is real, that this is happening, that our Navy pilots are encountering these vehicles. And so that imparts a credibility that simply did not exist prior to that time.
I was quoting Eric Davis. I know you're familiar with his work when I read that New York Times paragraph a moment ago. Do you believe that there are objects in our possession, broadly defined our possession, that are from something other than this earth?
What I will say about that is that I think that assertion should be taken seriously. I'm aware of, I know Eric very well. I understand.
So basically, it looks like it's at least legitimate enough to look into, right? We're not making the claim that there are aliens here and they're among us and they've been visiting, but it's something that needs to be looked at because it would seem that maybe there's credible enough evidence that it should be investigated, right? That's what we're saying here. And so again, nice story, not a depressing story like some of the stuff we've been looking at, a little bit more lighthearted. So that's good. So who knows, right? It's definitely unclear from the information that came out this week exactly what's going on, but there is a Pentagon task force looking into things, and Congress has been a little bit connected with this as well. So we'll see where that goes. It's definitely going to develop over time. We'll see where things go. All right, we got this. Department of Homeland Security found to be gathering intelligence on journalists covering Oregon protests. So that's interesting that they're actually gathering intelligence on journalists, right? We're not talking about protesters or people that are involved. We're talking about gathering intelligence on the journalists, right, who are writing about it. You have to be careful when your government starts investigating journalists who are not really accused of any kind of a crime. That's the kind of stuff, you know, we hear about people in Russia falling out of buildings. There's been a lot of people in Russia falling out of buildings lately. Journalists, stuff like that. We don't want that happening here, obviously. So a couple things to note. There was the Department of Homeland Security has compiled intelligence report about the work of American journalists covering protests in Portland, Oregon, in what current and former officials called an alarming use of a government system meant to share information about suspected terrorists and violent actors. So it's a system that was put in place to look into suspected terrorists and violent actors, but what they're looking into is reporters, right? Journalists. Now, this is one of those paragraphs that might seem like a good thing at first, but then you kind of have to wonder, right? After the Post published, oh, hi Sarah Darklaw, glad you're here. Glad you're in the chat. Good to have you here. After the Post published a story online on Thursday evening detailing the department's policies, the acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf ordered the intelligence office to stop collecting information on journalists and announced an investigation into the matter. So basically, it looks like, you know, you do the right thing after you get caught with your hand in the cookie jar, then you're doing the right things. But before that, it was okay to not do the good thing. So at first you go, oh, that's great. Chad Wolf, the guy in charge, he's doing the right thing about this. Yeah, he's doing the right thing once he got called out on it, which is not, it doesn't make you real confident that the right kinds of things are going on with things. So yeah, good to have a little bit of action in the chat there. Good to see you, Sarah. We're going through some stories here, checking stuff out. Pentagon training materials will no longer refer to journalists as adversaries. That's probably a good idea, right? So basically in the papers that were going around in the Pentagon, they kept referring to journalists as adversaries. Well, you can imagine what kind of frame of mind that puts you into if you're reading that stuff and you're planning for how you're going to do things. If you're calling them adversaries all the time, you're going to think about them as adversaries, right? You're going to think of them with that negative connotation, and it isn't good. So they got called out on this, and they're actually starting to do something about it. They changed it. They're not going to call them adversaries anymore. They're calling them, unauthorized recipients, right, is what they're calling them now. So different, but definitely not with as much of a negative connotation. All right. Now we get into the post office. So there's a few things going on with the post office. Few stories here. Lawmakers warn of onerous new USPS loan terms imposed by Mnuchin could accelerate demise of the Postal Service. So remember, the post office got a little bit of money from the last coronavirus bailout. I think it was the last one that came out and went through. It was one of those ones that went through already. But remember, there was a couple things going on. There was supposed to be an inspector general keeping an eye on how all this was done. Well, Trump promptly fired that individual. So now basically Mnuchin gets to decide. It's essentially just up to him with very little oversight how all this money has been going out the door. And I think we have a couple stories later about how there was rampant fraud. Maybe I didn't include that one. But they have found hundreds of millions of dollars of fraud for how that money has been distributed. But what he was also able to do is he gets to dictate the terms under which companies get to take out those loans. And so basically what they've done, remember that Trump put one of his people in charge of the post office, right? One of his big donors. It wasn't someone who has a history of understanding the post office. It was somebody who donated a bunch of money. We'll see that story in just a second. Kind of, they're slowing things down intentionally. Here, Mnuchin came in and said, okay, we'll give you this money, but here's what you're going to do for us. And basically what they're doing is it's almost like an audit, right? I'm sort of generalizing here as being a little bit overly broad, but they're basically going to go in, they're going to look at the details of how, if the post office takes this money, one of the conditions is they basically have to hand over all this information to Mnuchin and his guys who are going to go in and basically look at all the financials and figure out how they can break down the post office a little bit more. So the post office has sort of said at the moment they don't want to take the money if they can help it, but it looks like they're probably going to have to take it, and it could actually, as we see here in the title, could accelerate the demise of the Postal Service, which is what some people are sort of suspecting is the whole goal. The Republicans have been trying to break down the Postal Service for a very long time. They did some, a long time ago, they did some sketchy stuff with the way the post office has to fund its pensions and all that kind of stuff. Here we see another breakdown of things, and it could be especially important this year because there is likely to be a massive amount of mail-in voting happening in November, and if the post office is not operating at full capacity, there could be issues with that. So that leads us into the next story here. Oops, let me move this over a bit. The U.S. Postal Service is considering closing post offices around the country, sparking concerns ahead an anticipated surge of mail-in ballots in the 2020 elections. So they're trying to figure out, without a real legitimate bailout, how they're going to keep things together. And one of the things they may be doing is closing actual post offices. There are concerns that one of the things that could occur because of this person that Trump put in charge, who was the big donor that he put, that's basically, what are your credentials to run the post office? Well, I gave a bunch of money to Trump's campaign, is essentially the answer. They're putting things in place in the name of saving money, right? They're saying we're changing things to save money, but what the people at the post office and watchdogs are saying is, actually, you're slowing everything down. Well, that's kind of an issue because with the upcoming election, people are saying that effectively what could happen is that mail-in ballots that under a normal situation would arrive and be counted on election day may not make it till the next day. Well, that opens up a situation for Trump to say those shouldn't be counted because they didn't get there on time, right? So you see how this is going? His whole battle against mail-in ballots, him and his like close friends here are setting up a situation where ballots won't arrive until the next day. Then there'll be legal battles over whether those things should be counted or not. Voting is, let's see, Bob Mama saying, voting is easy and marginally useful, but is a poor substitute for democracy, which requires direct action by concerted citizens. Yeah, right. So, yeah, we need action taking place. We also need to be able to vote, right? We need all those things going on. All right, here's a good one. We got Michael Jordan and Jordan Brand donate $2.5 million to 3 organizations to combat black voter suppression. So we've seen that there in these primaries quite a bit of voter suppression going on in different areas, places like Louisville having one voting place for 600,000 people. Yes, it was a massive voting center, but it was one for an entire massive city. And there's a number of people. Michael Jordan has come out. LeBron James has also done it. LeBron James has a fund where they're going into Florida and this thing where, remember what happened where Florida voted to let its felons vote, and then the state house, the state Congress said, okay, they can vote, but they have to pay off all their fees that they owe the state first, right? Essentially a poll tax. It made its way. The Supreme Court actually said, no, we're okay with that. That they didn't consider it a poll tax. I still don't understand the logic how you couldn't call it a poll tax. Some people are like the LeBron James Fund is trying to go in directly and help people pay off those fees so that they can actually vote, which would be great, right? People should be voting, right? And Michael Jordan is doing some work here, again, to go in these areas that are hardest hit where this, the state looks at certain cities and says, well, I don't know. Numerous states do this. They say, I don't know. Let's reduce the number of polling stations. Let's reduce the number of voting machines in this particular area. And people are putting money in. It's actually, it's kind of condemning on our society that, rich athletes have to come in and put their own money to make sure that people are going to be able to vote. Hopefully we can get that fixed so that we don't rely on celebrities donating money to give people their franchise to vote. But whatever, at least something's being done, right? At least we're making some kind of progress here. What do we got? Okay, Devin Nunes. Devin Nunes stays silent when asked if he's been handed foreign intelligence on Joe Biden. So here's kind of the summary. So Representative Devin Nunes, right, representative from my state, California, refused to answer when directly asked whether he had been given foreign information meant to damage Joe Biden, according to a transcript of a closed-door committee meeting. So remember, this was kind of a big deal, like foreign interference are foreign countries trying to interfere in our election, and he was asked openly if he did this. Where's the quote's right here, right? So according to CNN, Maloney asked if Nunes is prepared to disclose to the committee whether he has received materials that have been called into question in the public reports from Andre Durkak, and if so, whether he is prepared to share them with the rest of the committee. House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff asked if Nunes wanted to respond, to which the Republicans simply responded no. So he was called out in this closed house meeting. Like, it seems like there's reason to believe that you received foreign information which could have been given to you in order to affect the outcome of the election, and Nunes did not respond. That's pretty damning, right? Did not respond. Yep, yeah, I'm in SoCal myself, so and it always bums me out when I end up driving through Devin Nunes' district on my way to Northern California. And let's see. For the sake of time, we'll skip this story. But basically, this story was going into a public health expert came out and says that there is essentially zero doubt that most of the coronavirus deaths could have been avoidable, right? By people wearing masks, social distancing, closing restaurants, stuff like that, not having these parties with 700 people showing up, all that kind of stuff. But we won't go into the details on that one. We're get to the good stuff on time. Okay, here's something that at least gives you a little bit of hope that things might be going the right direction. DeSantis's popularity plummets in another Florida poll. So people are starting to kind of pay attention here. Remember, DeSantis was the one saying, we got to open up Florida. We got to get this economy going. He's saying all the kids should go back to school. And as far as I know, the plans are still for people to be going to school. I think that's like a week or a week and a half from now, something like that. Those schools are supposed to be open and full of kids. And it's not good. Trump keeps saying, I heard him say it a number of times this week in the press conferences. He said it in Texas, and I believe he also said it in about Florida. He was in Texas when he said it about Texas. I think he was in D.C. when he said it about Florida. But he said, those states kind of blew up with a bunch of coronavirus cases, but they're coming back down and they're fine now. Except both of those states have been setting records for deaths from coronavirus this whole week. So they're not exactly coming down. They're getting much worse. And it is actually hurting DeSantis's popularity. So it's good to see people actually going, oh, maybe we don't want this kind of behavior. Maybe we want to fix things a little bit. All right, here's a report. FBI concealed copies of key docs in Russia probe out of fear Trump would end it. So there was apparently during the investigations that were going on into Trump, the FBI was afraid that if Trump found out about certain documents, those certain documents would disappear. So what they did was they have a special, I guess, computer system where when you put stuff in there, it can't just be deleted, right? They have a whole system that's like secure and isn't supposed to be hacked and all this kind of stuff. And also they hid hard copies of these documents around the Pentagon, right? And then didn't make it public where they were. So that way, if Trump sent out the message, get these documents and destroy them, there would still be copies of these things elsewhere. So kind of disturbing, and also lends credence to what Mueller told us right when that Mueller report came out and he was testifying, is he said, yes, basically he said they weren't able to do a full investigation because documents were being like text messages and emails were being deleted before they could investigate it. People weren't testifying. And here, the FBI had credible reason to fear that documents were going to be destroyed. So at least they stepped up and did something about it rather than just playing along. So that's good. Let's skip this one, too, for time. Basically, Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany is talking about how we condone Hong Kong's government decision to postpone the election, which is a little ironic considering that one of the major news stories of this week was Trump suggesting that we postpone the election, right? But it's okay for us to do it in this country. It's wrong when other countries do it, right? When China does it, it's bad. It's okay when we do it. Let's skip this one too. So Eamon Bundy, I don't know how familiar you guys were. Eamon Bundy is the one in Oregon. So he's been in trouble for letting his, why is it so large? He's a big proponent of letting his cattle graze on federal land, but then not paying the fees that he's supposed to pay to the feds, not paying that. And so that's kind of how he got famous. And then there was a whole showdown for a while with this kind of stuff a few years back. Well, basically, there's a meltdown where he's actually for defunding the police, believe it or not. And he's trying to tell his followers that he wants to defund the police, and they basically are blowing up at him, telling him that he's lost his mind. So that was kind of an interesting one. All right, here's one that is not the greatest. Let's see. So Jared Kushner's secret plan went poof into thin air. So I actually did a piece on this. This was a video I put out, I think yesterday we talked about it. So remember, Jared Kushner is essentially running everything. He's running Israel policy, what we're doing in the Middle East, that's up to Jared Kushner. The coronavirus, a lot of it is being decided by Kushner. And so he had a task force, and he went in there and said, okay, let's figure out what we're going to do about testing when this whole virus stuff was blowing up. And what the group was initially doing was they were deciding how they were going to buy up large numbers of tests, and then they were going to distribute it out to the country. They were coming up with the whole plan that our country wanted, which was a federal government saying, yes, we have purchased large number of tests. We're going to get them where they need to go, right? And then what happened, somebody realized, let's see if I can find that quote in here, because it's kind of an unbelievable quote. There's other stuff with the way the tests that they did buy were done totally in a way that you're not supposed to do, right? Some people get upset about bureaucracy, and yeah, bureaucracy is not great, but one of the things about bureaucracy is you can track things, and there's a paper trail, so that when things happen, you can go in there and make sure that it's being done properly. Well, the tests that the government bought were not, it was like one invoice and none of the proper procedures were being done. So there was kind of the showdown between the U.S. and the United Arab Emirates about these tests that were bought, where the U.S. was saying we can't pay for them because the proper processes weren't handled. But that's kind of the minor detail of the story. The big part was where they said, darn it, I had it and then can't find the quote. But basically what they said was they got to the point. Can't find it. So they got to the point where they were going to implement this federal plan for saying, you know, oh, there's a breakout in New York. Let's get tests to New York so they can take a look at it. Oh, now it's blowing up in Florida. Let's get tests to Florida. What they said was, well, it really kind of seems like the areas that are blowing up with the virus, remember this is back in like February, March timeframe. The areas that are blowing up with the virus are Democrat areas. They're blue cities and blue states. That's where the virus is, and that's where it's really bad. So maybe we don't want to do anything about this. Maybe we just want to let the virus rage through these Democratic cities, and that actually could be beneficial for them, right, for Kushner. And that's ultimately what they decided to go with, right? That was the plan that they went with, was doing things that way because it wasn't in their best interest. They called it unnecessary. They said, well, it's really the blue cities that are blowing up, so a comprehensive plan is unnecessary, right? They used unnecessary, and then said it's. The other quote was, it is against our political best interest, right? Which is pretty upsetting to hear your own government say that. A long article. It's the piece in Vanity Fair is the one that's sort of the original piece. There's lots of articles that were written about this, but it all originally came from the piece in Vanity Fair that was discussing, basically it all tracks back to Kushner, because although it was a committee he was working with, it was understood that the person who makes the final decision was going to be Kushner. And he's getting a lot of bad press about it in the last 24, 36 hours. Isn't good at all.
The rule of three states, things that come in threes are inherently more appealing.
This ad and pause it. I don't want to hear it. So what we have here, McConnell has said that there is 15 to 20 GOP senators that are not going to vote on any coronavirus deal, no matter what. It's not coming. They don't want to do it, right? So Rand Paul has already expressed concern about the cost that the government is spending, but there's 20 people now that are just going, we're not going to get on board with this at all, which I kind of suspected might be the case. The only thing they really needed that they hadn't got yet was that liability, so that you can't sue your employer when you get coronavirus because they don't follow safety procedures. That's what the Republicans wanted. Well, it looks like they're going to have a hard time getting that through. So then the Republicans have just said, well, why are we going to have another coronavirus deal, right? And the obvious answer is because human beings are having a very hard time right now. But if it doesn't help companies, they're not real concerned about it. So we'll see how this plays out this week, right? The Republicans waited until this week to pick up the issue and then try to negotiate through on it. I'm not real confident we're going to see anything that is a good deal here. I don't think we're going to see much. Okay, here we have AOC. There was a House committee meeting this week where the tech giants were being grilled about a number of things. And here's AOC talking to Mark Zuckerberg.
One more question. In your ongoing dinner parties with far-right figures on Facebook targeting Republicans in primaries saying that they voted for the Green New Deal, I mean, if you're not fact-checking political advertisements, I'm just trying to understand the bounds here. What's fair game?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think
so. You don't know if I'll be able to do that.
I think probably.
Do you see a potential problem here with a complete lack of fact-checking on political advertisements?
Well, Congresswoman, I think lying is bad, and I think if you were to run an ad that had a lie, that would be bad. That's different from it being, in our position, the right thing to do to prevent your constituents or people in an election from seeing that you had lied.
So you won't take down lies, or you will take down lies? I think it's just a pretty simple yes or no.
Congresswoman,
I'm not talking about spin. I'm talking about actual
yes, in most cases, in a democracy, I believe that people should be able to see for themselves what politicians that they may or may not vote for
so
are
you
saying,
won't take
judge
them
their
down.
Character for themselves.
So you won't take. You may flag that it's wrong, but you won't take it down.
Congresswoman, it depends on the context that it shows up. Organic post. Ads, right. The treatment is a little bit different.
One more question. In your ongoing dinner parties with far-right figures, some of who advanced the conspiracy theory that white supremacy is a hoax, did you discuss so-called social media bias against conservatives, and do you believe there is a bias?
Congresswoman, so I don't remember everything that was in the in the question.
That's all right. I'll move on. Can you explain why you've named the Daily Caller, a publication well documented with ties to white supremacists, as an official fact checker for Facebook?
Congresswoman, sure. We actually don't appoint the independent fact checkers. They go through an independent organization called the Independent Fact Checking Network that has a rigorous standard for who they allow to serve as a fact checker.
So you would say that white supremacist tied publications meet a rigorous standard for fact checking?
So she basically dismantled him there. He had no good answers. You would think the person who is the top person at Facebook would have been prepared to answer questions like this, but not at all. So we'll see. It doesn't look real good with how the election ads are going to go going into the next few months that we're going to have, especially with how they went 4 years ago on Facebook. Here we have, this is just a couple of good things that we need to know and make sure everyone's being safe and doing the right thing. So Fauci comes out and, makes it clear hydroxychloroquine is not effective in treating COVID-19. We are still hearing from Trump himself about hydroxychloroquine. We'll see Gohmert talking about it in just a minute. And Fauci is saying, look, don't take it. You shouldn't be doing it.
Chloroquine, which the FDA said in June should not be used for COVID because it does not have known effects, known benefits, and it does have known risks for cardiac effects. So how damaging is that he retweeted the video and defended it again today?
Well, the only thing that I can do, Andrea, is do what I've done all along consistently, is that you look at the scientific data and the evidence. And the scientific data, the cumulative data on trials, clinical trials that were valid, namely clinical trials that were randomized and controlled in the proper way, all of those trials show consistently that hydroxychloroquine is not effective in the treatment of coronavirus disease or COVID-19.
So that's about as simple as it gets there with the science, right? This is a scientist talking, laying it out. It's about as straightforward as it could get. It's not effective, right? Should not be. And in some cases, it can actually be dangerous. If you have heart conditions, it can actually work against you. So pretty clear what the science actually says on it. And he had another recommendation out this week saying, so Dr. Fauci recommends wearing goggles to prevent catching the coronavirus. So basically, any of your body openings where you have this mucous membrane is a potential entrance for viruses. So he's saying, it makes sense. Wear goggles, wear glasses, wear something like that. So if you're someplace and someone coughs, it gets in your eyes, you have a barrier so that virus is not getting right onto your eyes and right around your eyelids where those membranes are, which are areas where that's usually where the viruses are getting in. They can't get in like through your straight up skin. They're getting in some kind of place that is an opening in your skin, right? Whether it be a cut or your mouth or nose or eyes or whatever. So not a bad idea, right? If you want to be armed with all the knowledge that you can when you go out in public and buy your groceries, not a bad idea. Or at least some glasses. At least put on some glasses or something like that if you want to be safe. Okay, here's a good one. Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont signs sweeping police reform bill. So this is good, right? We're starting to see some changes taking place here. So what did we get? We got the law institutes a new statewide watchdog for police misconduct. Great. Bans chokeholds in most instances. Great. Puts limits on the ability of police departments to withhold officers' disciplinary records. Great. It also allows individual officers to be held financially liable in civil suits over their actions. Great. These are all good steps, right? This is by no means the whole thing, right? We still need to see more reform being done, but this is a good start. These are things that we need to see happening in more states so that we reform the way the police stuff is being done, and hopefully we get to a situation where the police and civilians can sort of live in harmony, right? Hopefully we can get there. Lots and lots of work to be done, right? Even still in Connecticut, but it's a good start. Good way to get things going there. Let's skip this one. All right. Pelosi mandates masks in House chamber after Gohmert tests positive for COVID-19. So there's kind of a few stories here. This was kind of going along for the whole week. So there were still people in the House trying to get away with not wearing masks. Jim Jordan got in trouble for this week. He got yelled at for not wearing his mask during a meeting. Gohmert's been going around not wearing his mask. And so Pelosi's like, enough is enough. Right? Everyone's wearing masks when you're in the House chamber, which seems kind of obvious. We're all supposed to wear masks when we go buy groceries, or I don't know about all, but where I am, you absolutely have to wear a mask when you go to the grocery store. They won't let you in without it. But it just seem like a civil responsibility? If you're in a room with a bunch of people and you're working on stuff, you should probably be wearing a mask so that it's not spreading around to the people who are running our country. Right, so she insisted, she put that in place, and confused Republican Louis Gohmert wonders if wearing a mask led to a positive COVID test. So we'll actually see him talk about it right here.
Hi, Louis Gohmert here. The reports of my demise are a great deal premature. Went to the White House today, but before you go in formally to the White House, they test you with the quick test. And it tested positive, but they get false positives sometimes. So they retested me with the swab that goes way up into your sinuses. And it finally came back. It was positive, too. So I'm asymptomatic. I don't have any of the symptoms that are listed as part of COVID-19, but apparently I have the Wuhan virus. Rand Paul was just texting me that the good news is that in 10 days or so, I should be fairly well immune. As far as the medium that tweets are sent out, that I was admonished yesterday at the judiciary hearing for not wearing a mask. Look, I've worn a mask more the last week or two than I have in the whole last 4 months. And I was wearing my mask at the judiciary hearing. And a couple of the other guys had mentioned earlier today, well, Nadler wasn't fussing at you. You had your mask. It was a couple of the other guys weren't wearing their masks. So that wasn't it. But it is interesting. And I don't know about everybody, but when I have a mask on, I'm moving it to make it comfortable. And I can't help but wonder if that, puts some germs in the mask. Keep the hands off your mask. But anyway, who knows?
So Gohmert is on record. He suspects it's his mask that got him the virus. He wouldn't have had, probably wouldn't have gotten it otherwise, but wearing a mask is what did him in. It was interesting when Bill Barr was testifying. Gohmert had tested positive earlier that morning. Then later at the Bill Barr testimony, there's video of him talking face-to-face with Bill Barr, neither one of them wearing a mask, right? So now Bill Barr is getting tested regularly to see if he picked it up from Gohmert, right? You guys just all need to be wearing masks. Come on. It's like pretty obvious this is what we need to be doing here. And then we see Louis Gohmert comes out later. He's going to be taking hydroxychloroquine. So Louis Gohmert, I am taking hydroxychloroquine to treat my coronavirus diagnosis. We just saw moments ago Fauci making it absolutely clear that there has been no science showing that hydroxychloroquine helps with the coronavirus. But here we have Louis Gohmert thinking that, first of all, his mask gave him the virus, and that, oh, by the way, he's going to take a medicine that has been shown to be completely ineffective for the virus. These are the people who are running our country. All right. Government watchdog finds strong indicators of widespread fraud in small business loan program. Whoops, I don't have the title there. So basically, like I was alluding to earlier, Mnuchin is basically kind of having free reign about where this money gets sent and under what conditions. And people are saying that it looks like there was at least $300 million given out inappropriately. So, and I'm not making the case that I'm not saying necessarily that Mnuchin did this on purpose, but there are cases, I think they were saying it's about $50 million of places who got double paid, so they received double checks, twice as much as they were supposed to, basically. And then there was a whole slew, few $100 million of places that weren't even eligible but filled out applications, were approved, and then they got money. So over $300 million that should never have been spent, according to the conditions, all went out. So that's going to be another developing story, which probably will be developing for many months, where we figure out where did that money go and was it used appropriately. Okay, I think this is an important note here because I still see quite a few people kind of confusing this issue with the protests and then the / rioting, right? What is exactly happening? So if you remember back to one of the early, it's like one of the first protests. So this was in Minnesota when things were first ramping up. There was this incident with who became known as the Umbrella Man, right? So the Umbrella Man showed up. He actually came, there's footage because people were taping him. He came from the opposite direction of the protests, came up to this auto zone, started smashing windows, and he wasn't at the protest. But then what happens is people connect the protests with the violence and the damage, right? We saw this in Portland. You just start saying, oh, well, the protests turned into a riot. The protesters were destroying buildings. But this Umbrella Man was not. In fact, they tried to stop him from smashing this building, and they were saying, look, don't do this. This is not what this is about. And he smashed it and then took off and went back to where he came from. Well, they believe they have identified him now. So it was this individual, if you remember. So this guy, that's why they call him Umbrella Man, showed up, started smashing windows. He was not a protester. The protesters trying to stop him.
Dubbed the Umbrella Man on social media, he was captured in this viral video.
So it turns out that he has ties to the Hells Angels and white supremacy groups. So that's essentially what's happening is people are showing up to the protests and trying to elevate things so that then there's all sorts of damage going on, and then it looks like a riot, and then it's no longer a peaceful protest, and then you get all sorts of chaos going on. So when we see people claiming that the protesters are damaging things, you just got to take time to see if that's really what's happening. Because in this case, it seems like it was a willful incitement to try to get that protest to become violent. And I still see quite a few people making that mistake of automatically thinking any damage that was done is the responsibility of the protesters. You got to separate into two boxes. Now, have protesters done things wrong? Sure, of course, there have been times when protesters have done things that were wrong, but it's not fair to blame the whole protest on a situation where, as we're seeing, it's outside instigators coming in oftentimes and trying to escalate things. And this is sad, right? I'm trying to keep things a little upbeat, but so according to polls last week, nearly 30 million Americans reported not having enough food last week. Right, and this makes it rough because as of this week, people will not be getting that extra money in their unemployment unless some kind of weird thing happens at the beginning of next week. People are already not having enough food, right? We are about to see some serious economic, in fact, this is the week where we are going to see some serious economic consequences because that the extra money that people were getting is going away. 30 million people are reporting that they don't have enough food, and we are about to see a level of evictions in this week that could possibly be the worst week for evictions in the history of our country, because there was this moratorium on evictions, but there was not a moratorium on processing the paperwork for your evictions. So we have landlords literally with stacks of papers ready to serve those eviction notices and get the ball rolling. I don't understand it. To me, it's old world thinking. If you were evicting millions of people, who do you think's going to come in and rent your place? Right? Who's going to do it? There's not going to be anyone to come in and keep that going. It seems to me like what you'd want to do is work something out with the people who are living there. Maybe you get a partial payment, something going on. But I think this method of kicking everyone out of their homes, I think isn't going to work for the landlords either. But it's where they're going. So definitely a time to have empathy for a lot of people. 30 million people is a lot, and I think we're going to see some pain this week, and that's unfortunate. Okay, a little bit of good news, a little bit upbeat. It's not completely clear exactly why this is being done, but I'm a fan of it. Best Buy joins Walmart, Target in closing Thanksgiving Day. So they're probably not going to lose a ton of money being closed Thanksgiving Day, but it's good to see that these stores are going to let their employees be home with their families on Thanksgiving. Right. I've never quite understood the idea of going out and shopping on Thanksgiving, but, you know, sometimes I do things differently. A lot of our country does like to go shopping on Thanksgiving, but especially this year, it's going to be a very weird situation where people are, trying to not get the virus. So, I don't think people are going to be fighting each other over TVs and stuff like that. So, good. Best Buy, Walmart, Target, people enjoy the day with your family. Okay, Herman Cain, U.S. ex-presidential candidate, dies after contracting COVID. Now, I want to make this clear because, sometimes I'm hammering on this behavior. It's a tragedy when anyone is lost to this virus, right? No matter what side of the aisle you're on, we don't want to see any deaths due to the virus. But you kind of reap what you sow, right? When you go out in public, he's been in crowds. I think that's an old picture, but there's one of these. He's basically in videos at the rally. People actually, if you look at the timing of when he got the virus, it was people surmise, and it seems like it was pretty good estimation that he got it at the Trump rally, right? All these people were packed in there, not wearing masks, encouraging other people to not wear masks, and he got it, and it wiped him out. And it is tragic, right? I'm not saying it's okay that he got it. What I'm saying is, people, put your masks on. Come on. Put your masks on. Stay 6 feet away from people. We won't see any more stories like this. All right, this is weird. So we had an earthquake in Southern California this week, not too far from where I am, about 30, 40 miles from where I am. It was a little one. I didn't feel it. But, it was a 4.2. 4.2s are not really that big of a thing. You just kind of ride them out. Once they get up into 5, they can be a little bit disconcerting. Make you a little bit uncomfortable when the building you're in starts creaking and you start to think things are going to break. But so 4.2, not a big deal. There was no reported damage, but look at the picture they're showing. This is what CNN does. So a 4.2, no damage reported, nobody hurt, but they show this picture of an area that was devastated by an earthquake. This picture has nothing to do with the earthquake they're reporting on, right? So it's just sort of mind-boggling in this era of news being all about clicks and getting people to read. You put an article up there about earthquake shakes Southern California's San Fernando Valley. Then you show a picture of an area that was devastated, but it's like not even in the United States, this picture or anything. So I would call that pretty irresponsible reporting, putting that picture there. A little ridiculous. We kind of covered that. Okay, let's end on a bit of a high note, at least what I consider a high note. So it appears that an appeals court will rehear case over the Flynn charges. So we don't know exactly where this is going to go, but it looks like the case for Flynn has not been completely closed. Now, I don't know what the time frame is and for how this will play out as far as justice being concerned. Hopefully this plays out after the election, or really even after the president is replaced, if we go that direction. It looks like Flynn may still need to answer for what he's done. So Flynn and Stone both potentially still have danger in their future. They both have charges that they could be charged with going forward. So those two definitely need to see Trump reelected because we've seen that justice has not been served in a number of different areas for individuals who essentially have admitted that they are guilty but will not do any time. Definitely disappointing for our country, but both of them still could see justice served in the future. So that's good. So that's what the article is basically getting at is, we'll have to see. It could be that Flynn still walks, but at least the system is trying to protect itself, trying to immunize itself against this breakdown that is currently happening in our society, and they're still trying to approach justice. So that would be great. So that's the stories we have today. Thanks a lot for everyone that showed up. Thanks to the people who put comments in there. Sarah and Bob, thanks for showing up and leaving some comments. And for the people who were lurking, didn't leave any comments, that's good too. Glad you joined us. I will keep doing these streams Saturday night, 6 p.m. Pacific. I have also been streaming on Twitch throughout the week, kind of getting the sense of how that goes. Twitch is set up a little bit better for more interaction while the stream is going on. So it's a little easier to interact over there. So it'd be great if any of you use Twitch, head on over, follow the channel, and then maybe you can watch some of those live streams over there. It's definitely fun. I'll keep doing this one here, but head over there, check that out if you're someone who uses Twitch. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Thanks for showing up. Right? It's great. Go enjoy your Saturday night. Have a good time, and we'll enjoy the news next time. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.